relationship with Tina's predecessor as Chief Exec, and I'm glad to be able to continue that relationship for the benefit of both ICRMC and the SRA. And in fact, Tina will now tell you a little bit more about the SRA before introducing our first keynote speaker of the day.
I will indeed. Good morning, everyone. Really good to see you. Good morning to everyone online. I hope you can hear me. If not, they can. Amazing. Really good to see you all. And I love the questions from the online audience yesterday. I thought there were some really, really good questions which really added to the discussion. So please keep them coming. Really good to see people sitting at the front. Yay. And then some people at the back. Welcome at the back. So the SRA, I mean, I always find CEO is a grand title for an organisation of 8 employees. So depending how I want to present myself, I say, oh yes, I'm a CEO for charity, medium-sized, you know. Or I just say we have 8 employees and it's the most friendly organisation I've ever worked in. So yes, the SRA, we've been around since 1978. So we've got our 50th anniversary coming up. And I think the remit of the SRA, to be serious, is really to support the research community professionally. Our aim is to share and drive best practice and innovation, and we do this through training, through events, through publications. We have a magazine, we have a blog. If you like writing blogs, please. We have an ethics board, which Helen very much is part of, and I know Helen there's a complementary ethics board, and I think that's very much what they are. They are complementary, and I think they cater for different audiences and different purposes. So to me, what I think, and Helen, as she said, has been a board member, so we very much have a close working relationship. And what I think is, so I guess my relationship with the SRA, I'm German. I arrived in the UK in 2000, and I joined what was then the Inland Revenue as their 3rd researcher. So we did go to comedy clubs, and you can imagine I was very quiet. Can you imagine? I worked for the Inland Revenue, and I'm German. I would have been there for the whole evening, focused attention. So yes, but of course I felt very alone as, you know, one of 3 researchers, and I thought I'm not going to learn about best practice or innovation when there's only 3 of us. So I looked around what's going on. I joined the government social research community, and I joined the SRA events committee because I wanted to find out what else was going on. I've since worked in charities, in academia, and in social research agencies. I've been an independent researcher. So my sales pitch when I applied for the job was, I've done everything all the members have done. So I know what's going on, which, you know, is changing rapidly now. But what I really like about the SRA, seriously, is that it is such a broad church, and it is about all methods and all approaches. Our members work in academia, they work in government, they're independents, they work in charities. They're quite often the only researcher in their organisation, or they may be part of 100 and they're wondering about their career trajectory and so on. So everyone's welcome, really, that is the point. With that comes the challenge of how do we cater for all our different members, and how do we provide services and events that are relevant, which is where we're very much reliant on all of you to tell us what you want to do, what you need, and what you would like to maybe offer. So we're always looking for trainers. If you would like to provide training, I know Nicole is already doing very good training for us, but if you have ideas, if you see things that isn't on our radar and think you want to do it, by all means, we do webinars. So be part of it, and I think that will make us better, really. And similarly, it's a whole range of methods, from the quantitative, who are amazingly well organised. I don't know why the survey people are so well organised, and there's a call to the qualitative people to match them, really. But yes, and I think the creative methods are very much part of this, and Helen has very kindly agreed to write something in the next magazine about the journal. Getting a new journal is a big deal, so well done, everyone, and we're keen to welcome and include this. Yes, I meant to also say we have a LinkedIn group of independent members, so where we try and post things about calls for independent members, training, and where people post to each other. So if you want to be part of that, get in touch with me and I'll add you, or find it on LinkedIn. Yes, that's all about the SRA. We have a leaflet, as you've seen, but by all means get in touch with any suggestions, questions. Come and find me. Now, the reason you're here is not to hear about the SRA, really. Hang on. So, Amanda, I'm excited about this talk already. I thought we had a fascinating presentation yesterday and particularly loved the bit about how do you get creative methods into the kind of quite rigid structures of academic assessments, and how do students respond to this. I love the questions about how many words is a picture worth. That will stay with me. Today we're talking about the Postdigital creative research. Amanda, again, someone who makes me think I've not done enough of my life. Amanda is a digital social scientist whose research interests and work spans a range of socio-technological intersections. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Amanda is a qualified social worker by background with extensive practice in psychiatric social work and social work with deaf children and their families. Through these practice experiences, Amanda developed a curiosity about how advancement in technologies could and should be harnessed for social good. Progressing into academia, this became focused on the contemporarization and real-world relevancy of higher education, with a particular emphasis on professional disciplines, and how relation curriculum design, content, delivery, and assessment supports graduate preparedness for an increasingly digitally saturated world. Indeed, if you want to talk to me about how AI is changing our discipline, please do. It's a great concern of mine. And I think actually one of the reasons why creative methods is taking off, I think it's sort of as a counterpoint to the increasing prevalence of AI. So back to you, Amanda. As a multi-award winning and internationally published academic recognized for leading critical and ethical discourse regarding social work and digitalization, Amanda is a leader in the development of pedagogic approaches that support the profession of digital knowledge and literacy for academics, students, and practitioners. We're very honored to have you here, Amanda, and to talk to us. Today, you're going to talk about post-digital creative research working through the Prenup. I can't wait. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I hate these things, by the way, and I'll probably miss my mouth I'll be doing all this kind of thing. I don't really enjoy doing this, but I'll do my best. And if I don't, point at me and do all whatever you need to. Tina, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Normally when you hear an introduction about yourself, you don't recognize yourself in it. And certainly in terms of my career and how that's all happened and disappeared actually in lots of ways, it's very hard to recognize all of that work that's gone on. And thank you to Helen and this conference for, I was going to say tolerating me, but inviting me to be part of it. And hopefully I'll have something useful to say. You've meant that I didn't have to do my second slide, so I also appreciate that as well, Tina. And I'm taking on board that Jacqueline said I have to be funny and perform. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that either, but I'll do my best at that as well. I'm starting with, does anybody know who this is? Nobody. I don't have a go with who it is. Furbies. Anybody else? I want to tell you that this is a researcher that outsourced all the research practices to AI and automation. And they are now in a museum. No, actually, this is Kismet, the very first social robot. I don't know if you've come across them, but if you haven't, it's worth looking them up. And they're now made redundant, obviously, in the MIT Museum. And I'm telling you this because recently I was given a talk about AI and social work, the social workers, and I posed a question to them, if they continue to outsource their practices to automation, like lots of things that social workers do actually can be automated, would they end up then? Are they worried that they're going to end up in a museum? And they felt very annoyed that I said that. It's because they've already started to automate a lot of their practices. So that's kind of some of the things that I'm going to bring to the fore really in terms of this talk. I was going to introduce myself. I will introduce me in my natural habitat, in my post-digital habitat. I have to say this because people think, oh, you're really anti-technology, which I'm not. I'm a real gadget. I'm a real nerd. I've got every kind of technology under the sun. And I'm just completely, mostly all the time, pissed off at how that is panning out in terms of people and rights and responsibilities and access to the world. So I'll spare you that one. How did I get into this kind of area and what's my research orientation? I'm a phenomenographer. Does anybody else do phenomenography? Oh, fantastic. There's two of us. I'm usually on my own with that, so I'm really pleased that there's somebody else as a phenomenographer. the phenomenologers surface and describe people's experiences of the world, and they relish in variation. Am I doing a good enough job of describing this? We look at quantitative differences in experience, and we see the richness of the variation and present the variation then in terms of improving. Well, the origins was in education, actually. Have you heard of deep and surface learning? That was the first phenomenographic study, and where that come from. And actually, at the moment, if you're thinking about that, thinking about pedagogy, higher education, you know, there's something to really pause in terms of thinking about the value and the role of phenomenography in the current iteration of the world that we are experiencing. Oh, that's my phone telling me I've got to take tablets. And my relationship with technologies, how did that come about? So when I first entered into social work education, it was at a time, sort of 2009, 2010, there were sort of murmurings around this idea of a digital shift. People remember that digital shift, everything was going to go digital and it was going to solve all the problems. We're going to have loads and loads of time to do research and read and like sit around in libraries talking to each other. And that didn't quite pan out. It was at a time that I was very excited about that fact that, you know, I love creative methods, I love creative pedagogy. And I was really focusing in on this is going to be brilliant. I'm going to have to really explore and examine this area, particularly as related to social work. And my job is preparing students for the, you know, practice in the social world. And some of the questions that I was asking at that time, I noticed immediately were starting to irk the people in universities that were procuring these technologies. One being, if a student uploads their assignment to this platform, is it still their assignment? Is that still their IP? What happens with that data? Are there implications for them? And the question, the response mostly to that was, don't worry, you don't need to worry about that. That's no problem. And I was still pushing and pressing into, have you explained to them the implications, what this means for them? Some of these students could go on to publish, you know, work and academic work, PhDs or whatever. There's an implication here in terms of the trajectory of their IP. And it didn't really go down very well. So I didn't close it down, I just held it tight. And at the same time, I was noticing in social work in particular, practitioners were really coming unstuck in their practice. And lots of them, they were finding themselves in front of the professional regulator, being held to account for their digital practices. And there was a real lack of translation of personal use of digital technologies and professional use. It wasn't, that didn't seem to be happening. And there was some very high profile cases about that on news and all the rest of it. So again, that was somewhere my head turned towards that. And I started to think about my responsibility in that. So what am I doing? Because I'm responsible for educating, preparing students for this particular practice. So what am I doing about this problem? So that was formed the basis of my doctoral studies. And I took a phenomenographic approach to that work. And it sort of, like in a nutshell, what the students were telling us very, very clearly was that they were actually more frightened by their lack of digital development through the curriculum and through their higher education experience. That was increasing their anxiety when they get into practice. And actually what was lacking more than anything was the academics, the educators' inabilities to be able to teach them what they needed to know about this problem area. So that's sort of, I've been then thinking of that for a very long time. And when I was trying to make the argument that this was a problem in higher education, the other thing I was noticing, which I think Diamond encapsulates really well actually, about this idea of a creeping normality. And I think at the moment we need to be really worried and really preoccupied and stay awake with me at night about this problem, because things are being brought to the fore and we are adopting them and accepting them and adapting to them with very limited criticality around the implications of what we are aligning ourselves with. And sometimes we don't even see that we are doing that. And I know when I was asking students about, and still ask practitioners about, and educators about their digital development, there is still a lack of association between professional and personal use. That translation is just not happening. It's not concrete enough. So I now do a lot of work around government with different professional groupings, thinking about, you know, digital confidence and competence building, and actually who's educating the educators is my continual wins to these people in these groupings. because that's the bit for me that's missing. Because if we don't feel equipped to teach about this, how are we going to ever expect students to be equipped then to do anything with that in terms of their, their future, what they go on to do? So I think it's worth just keeping that in mind, keeping that in our gaze. Another sort of turning point for me was I think it was June before COVID was known to be a thing in the world. I was asked to apply for a job at Queen's University in Belfast. And obviously you can hear from my accent, that's where I'm from. So it was an opportunity to go home and an opportunity to do something I loved at home. So I jumped on that idea. I was there 16 weeks, and in the first 16 weeks, I was going around introducing myself and telling everybody about my interest, digital intersections. I'm interested in anything that intersects with digital. Doesn't matter what it is, I'm here for that. And people were saying, we really don't do digital here, Amanda. It's not really our thing. And I was thinking, they appointed me to look at the research agenda and the pedagogy and all the rest of it. And I was thinking, well, this is going to be really difficult because actually nobody wants to play. Like people were shutting the door. In fact, I got brought to the head school's office in week 2 because I had and wrecked this computer of this professor. But what I'd actually done was send him a Teams message. He didn't know he had this wrecking ball. And when it jumped up on his screen, he pressed all sorts of buttons and he lost a lot of his research. There was a real problem. Like it was there somewhere. Obviously, like somebody's got our data, isn't it? So you're never going to really lose it, So it was all very high drama. And I was amused by this, which didn't go down well either. So humor's not always the best strategy, I have to say. But I got into a bit of trouble about that. But then the next thing what happened was COVID. And I got this call from the head of school. They said, where the hell are you? And I said, well, I'm actually in Lancashire. He said, but you work in Belfast. And I said, I came home to give a keynote about the future of digital in higher education at UCLan, where I used to work. And he said, but you need to get back. And I said, Boris said, I can't. And he said, you need to fix the problem. And I said, I can probably fix it better remotely anyway. So it was a bit like, be careful what you wish for. I'm giving you these nuggets here because it was like a freight train then, because everything I have been wanting to happen and people recognizing this area came at me like a freight train. And even though Queen's is a beautiful place and it's a fabulous university, in terms of digital and technology and infrastructure, it was as old and archaic as the beautiful buildings that we were strolling around in the day. So there was a real tension there. And another thing then that happened was I got coerced, I want to say, onto the ethics committee with a very good colleague and friend of mine, Dina Bellalucci, and we at that time were the only people that were knocking back proposals like left, right, and centre research proposals, because obviously the world had gone mad and everybody threw every digital fire blanket onto every single practice in that world without thinking about the implications. So we were sending proposals back and saying, hang on a minute here, you haven't articulated the implications of bringing a person into this space. And people were not getting this, and what we realised was there was a huge training need, and that most of the people that were reviewing or supervising or supporting people to do PhDs or research projects or whatever, they did not have the expertise either to be careful around where they were putting participants and their data and the implications of that. So we wrote about it as you do when you get frustrated, you write something. So we wrote a paper in Bear for that, and we pursued research funding, which we didn't get actually, to do something about that. And at the same time then I was recognising that in my own disciplinary area and other disciplinary areas, again, there was a real urgency that people weren't recognising about the choices they were making around digital technologies and the technologies that they were procuring and deploying in terms of the implication around people's rights, and protections. And we were really concerned about that. So we again wrote a paper about that as well in terms of in social work specifically. And then we went on to write some more stuff about that as well. Just in regards to technologies, and as I said before, because I do really like technologies, and I think technology brings obviously a lot to our world. You're sitting on a technology, you probably got here on a technology, shoes, trains, whatever it might be. You'd be writing with the technology, you'd be drawing with the technology, you'd be doing all sorts of things. We're wearing technology. It's all around us all of the time. And I've always really enjoyed it, probably to the nth degree, actually. But when I was doing my analysis of the data and my doctoral research, everybody around me was saying, you must use the technology, you have to get it into technology, but this is going to make life so much easier for you. And I was thinking, right, easier for me. I never feel very comfortable when it's about us, me, one kind of thing. I was thinking, is it better for the participants? Is it better for the outputs of the research? Like, but is it better for me? Okay, right, okay. I'll have a go. And I wasted a month wrangling with myself about this technology. And I know it's a particular technology. I don't know what technologies you've tried, and it does work for other people, but it did not work for me. It actually created a really dark and unhelpful barrier between me and my participants in the data. I couldn't see them, I couldn't feel them, I was having no experience of it anymore. I was tinkering with the technology, I was labouring to fit them into a technology and really struggled with that. I wanted to bring that, and I immediately retreated from that actually. I wrote a bit about that in the Phenomenography, doing Phenomenography book for Helen Carr's series on creative methods recently. And I probably would have laboured it more. And I think some of the review was to stop labouring this problem. Because obviously I had a real need to therapeutically like expand myself with this problem. I did manage to get some points in there, not as many as probably would have liked to, but I was just making the points that we need to pause and think about this. We're rushing ahead here, and we're buying into all this publish and perish kind of nonsense that actually is very polar opposite to what we want to achieve in terms of people. We've got enough people rushing us through the social world, really. And then I got very interested in this idea of how do you frame this to people? Because I often find when I talk about digital, people, they're not very interested. Like in my Queen's experience, we don't really do digital here. It's not really our thing. You know, we teach social work, we teach about ethics, you know, we teach about rights and law and all those important things like communication and all these things. We don't really do digital. And I could see this before COVID, this freight train coming towards us, and then COVID happened. And Postdigital helped me. I was lucky enough that my colleague at the time, Alison McKenzie, was involved in this work around Postdigital and allowed a frame for people to think, I'm getting this. And they weren't seeing that natural connection between clicks and committing and the implications of that. Because often you do that on your own. You click on your own. You're in your own kind of sphere about it. It's not easy to see it. It's very much black box, isn't it, technology? So how to surface that has become a real problem. And I would really advise Jan-Rick and Alison's work. It's a really helpful way to start to think about the interconnectedness, to disabuse ourselves of that idea. It happens online, which I think we're less prone to now. And talking about IRL, in real life. I want it in real life. Whereas in technologies and our interactions with technologies are very real. People will often say to me, I want to see you in real life. You know, we're on a Teams call or whatever. And I say, but like the only thing you can't do right now is like smell me or touch me. You know, you can touch the screen if you want, like if you so wish, you know, if that's your thing. But, you know, that's the only difference. And they'll say, you know, it does rupture proximity, doesn't it? Like it did in the pandemic, and we worried a lot about that. But in lots of ways, there's a way to set up. I'm sure if you were on the online meeting for this keynote, you will still be able to have a fairly decent experience of the conference, or you'll miss the cakes and the buns and all that kind of thing. But you can create that at home, I'm sure. The Postdigital, I think, gives us a really helpful way to associate with this as something that we should be preoccupied and concerned with. Obviously, how they talk about is, I'm sure everyone in this room will subscribe to about being agentic, you know, about agency and technology. That is always a big struggle, you know, about being empowering and democratic. They also recognise that this idea of how, have you heard of the Broligarts, that term that Carol Kawada has just very helpfully got into the dictionary? I'm sure she got it into the dictionary recently, where you know, they've largely got 5 or so tech bros, like determining everything really, if we stopped and thought about it in terms of the future of our world, which is a very dangerous place to be, and critical therefore that groups like this keep congregating around problems like this, because more and more and more we do need that physicality and materiality. We do need to be in embodied sense with each other. And how do we create that whilst exploiting technologies and taking care of our planet? Because obviously it does bring advantages. this is something I talk about a lot, and it came up when I was doing some research with young people about how the technology was doubly disadvantaging them. So in COVID, lots of people reached out for help around different projects, where they were doing physical pieces of work, where they really needed people to congregate and be together. And some of the young people that we were working with at that time hadn't got data, hadn't got phones, iPads, or whatever. There might be one iPad in the house, there might be data in the house, but there wasn't enough to go around. And we did a piece of work where we got iPads and copious amounts of data and gave them to these young people, in areas where they would be described as disadvantaged areas, rather than we disadvantage you because of the way we have created this world. And the big concern at that point around the funding was, what if they sell them and steal them and break them? And my retort to that was, and what if they don't? And actually, what would ever mean that you would lead you to that conclusion that they may do that? And who's got any scrutiny over your data and your usage and how you spend your data or whatever it might be? And actually, they didn't do any of those things because they were so taken back that we would trust them with these technologies and this data, that it actually became something very precious and very symbolic in terms of that relationship that we were forming at that time. And this double disadvantage also in terms of research more broadly, when you're thinking about putting projects together. If you're using technologies of any description to, whether it's in interviews or meetings or whatever it might be, or even your written work or testing something on a large language model or whatever it might be you're doing, you need to consider very closely what happens with that data, particularly people's data. And you have to have agreement from them to put it in that place that may double disadvantage them. Because interoperability, which I used to really crave for when I worked with the NHS in terms of the digital transformation, has become such a problem. And people will often say, oh, once my data is sold, it's sold. Well, it's not, because it's recreated and recreated and recreated for all different purposes. Has anybody ever met their digital twin? Like, would you have a first idea to even go back to the start, your first day on the internet, or the first day somebody put you on the internet? Because let's face it, there's a lot of kids go on the internet, their profile, isn't it? Biometrics, I'm pregnant, here's my photograph, it's all over all these different technologies. And there begins my digital journey and my digital trajectory. And all of that data accumulates into how I will experience this world, particularly if you think about what is going on in the world at this time. In terms of research, we need to be asking ourselves questions about the technologies. Like, we built hospitals, didn't we, and schools and locations and environments to do public services work, because we needed places that were safe and that kept people safe. And now we're bringing people into platforms that we know are problematic, and we know that their data will be exploited, and we are seeing that more and more and more. We've seen it in the pandemic. What my hope was that what we've seen happen in the pandemic would actually allow us to stop and pause and regroup and not continue that practice. Just stop that now. We needed to do that because it was a crisis. We needed every fire blanket under the sun to get through it. But actually now we need to reconfigure. We need to do something different. We need something to do our work on, and that doesn't exist, because it's not lucrative for our governments for that to exist. So what does this all mean, kind of thing? Like, what are we going to do? What does it mean? And this talk is not to give answers, by the way. It's actually, and I was hoping not for questions, more that we would have a discussion about where we're all up to in our thinking in this, so we can sort of timestamp at this moment in time what this community thinks, what we want to do about this. Are we going to do something about it? Should we do something about it? Is it urgent? That was more where I was going with this. So these are just some of the thoughts that I've had, and I'll give you these slides because I've put lots of references on them, because I think it's better after to go back and have a look through things or whatever. I don't know, this is a big problem, isn't it, really? How are we going to topple the Broligarts, 4 or 5 white men floating about in their yachts and their rockets to the moon, in fact, like, what social value, what value is that to us, that we're shooting people off to the moon? Like, what is that bringing to the mix? What are we going to do about this? Because the danger is, the magnitude of the task is so overwhelming, we will do nothing. Because it's too big. Even when I go and talk about digital transformation in local authorities, everybody gets so overwhelmed by the bank of the chat, nothing happens, nothing changes. We just keep going and keep going and keep going. So what is it we're going to do about this problem? I think it's a very real problem. I know we talk about capitalism, neoliberalism, and all those things all of the time. But actually, how tuned in are we to this interconnection between, I hope this is not going to offend anybody, but did anybody see Wes floating about on a boat? Wes, you know, like our head of our NHS and health, our minister, with all these pals of all the oligarchs yesterday? You know, we need to be concerned, don't we? This is somebody who really benefits from our NHS. Our NHS is heading towards, you know, well, we've already got a contract with Palantir. And what does that even mean for us? You know, I do actually, I'm so glad I'm a bit old and I'm like nearly about to retire and all that, because I think I've less to worry about really in that respect. But everything's fallen off me anyway. So, but our NHS has agreed this contract with this kind of company. And we all now know, if you didn't know before, we know. And it's not proven to be any better, as it says here, than what we had before. Locally, this is what's going to happen. The narrative around this, you know, we're going to mainline AI into the veins of the nation. Like, what did Labour actually get in? Like, I missed something. Like, is it Joseph or something? What is going on? You know, and the hype. I think I was in a talk yesterday, and somebody was talking about hype, the hype around it. You know, we've got whipped up into a frenzy about this. What did you do to that moment when like ChatGPT was launched out into the ether? I was in about 2 days. I was completely exhausted with people asking me questions about, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think? What are you going to do about it? I was going to stay away from it as much as I can for as long as possible, actually, because you know I don't work and I don't like the language hallucinations. You know, there's really implications in the language there. So there's so much. Well, there's a huge amount of time is, but there's huge amount for us to be thinking about it. I think we need to be tuning in much more to socio-technical interference. And when I talked about, have you ever met your digital twin, or would you ever even be able to start to map out that first moment that you made that first mark on the internet? And actually, if we were able to bring that up onto the screen, what would that look like? And who's contributing to that? And what are they saying about you? You know, what do people write down in our records and files? It might even be GPs or whoever. But there's a data story about each and every one of us. It's going to have real implications when this digital ID comes in. I was thinking about it this morning. I was thinking about, you know, the idea of a panopticon and the prisons, but it was very visible, that wasn't it? You could see it, you knew it was happening. But it goes back to that creeping normality. All of this is going on, and we think, well, I don't know, where do you do your most private, like texting or social media? We don't do it like publicly, you know, put it on a screen and like do it publicly. We think we've got this notion of privacy. It's very misplaced. So we need to think about that as well. There's a lot to think about. You'll be glad when I go. And in terms of research and informed consent and consent, and ideas around GDPR and data protection and rights, how do we explain this to people? So if you're developing a research project and you're going to use a technology, whatever technology, and it's gone through all the governance in your university or your NHS or social care, wherever it is you might work, that's all been done. Everybody's happy about that. Will you be happy? Do you feel contented that you know when you use a technology for your research where the data is going? And does that have any implications for the people you work with? And are you able to articulate it? Because explainability is a requirement under GDPR. So where does that leave us in terms of that? And people ask me, well, what's the answer to this? What do you do? What I do is I tell people about the problem, because at the moment I have no way around it. I work at a university and I have to use their systems. And Microsoft out of them all is probably the best in terms of not being squeaky clean. And I'm really open for people to say there's another way to do that. It'd be really good to hear that. But if the people who develop these platforms can't explain it, well, how are we going to explain it in research context, particularly around ethics? How are we going to articulate that? If the designers can't articulate it, or they articulate it in a way that's like, I don't know, have you bought a new phone or a new technology And you obviously read all those, there's probably 300 or 400 pages before you click accept. There's no way anybody, like a responsible researcher, right, would open a brand new device of any description and not read all that before they click accept, would we? Has anybody got any unboxing on like TikTok or something where they show us how they've read through all that? And when you do actually take the time to read through it, does anybody understand it? It is so hard to understand. I spent some time a while back building an app with students in America, and it was a complete nightmare. Which I think I actually got in touch with Helen's Nick about to say, like, help me out here. This is a complete minefield, and we abandoned it in the end because it was so difficult. So something else to think about. And then in terms of this idea, like John Notton wrote this a long time ago. His book From Gutenberg to Zuckerberg. It's a really good read, actually. And he talks about, and still talks about, that we've got critically dependent on the technologies that we just don't understand, which was built in, obviously, to the model all along. If you ever heard one of Zuckerberg's first talks about his technology and how it was going to revolutionize the world, did you ever hear that talk? Am I allowed to swear?
Yes, yes.
Where he called all of us dumb fucks. There's a brilliant slide about it on the internet. I usually put it in, and then I thought I wasn't sure. I wasn't in an Ireland suit, so I was being very careful here. So what are we going to do about that in terms of our practices? And I think that's where creative methods is going to come into its own, as Tina mentioned earlier. And the pushback, the resistance and resistance is going to come through this surge and this movement. When Helen was saying, like, it's getting big, you know, if you want to take it around the country, off you go, kind of thing. And I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking, Helen, you said that out loud, and that is actually a possibility. That could happen. If enough people got round this problem, that could happen. That could be our new reality. How amazing would that be? So if you come across Alonda Nelson and her work on the blueprint for AI pre-Trump, which is now obviously, it's not probably not even in pause, it's probably in a shredder somewhere. She's lucky to escape that. And she talks a lot about getting a language, growing a language to talk about these issues. And I've been watching a lot of professional disciplines in terms of their evolution with this and how they're taking these problems on in their own disciplinary areas. And the lawyers are actually quite good. They've done some really good work around logarithms and algorithms of oppression, and they talk very much about, you know, the one thing you cannot do is cross-examine an algorithm. It's not possible, but it's built into every single system. Every welfare system has been going on for a very long time in child welfare, and it's just been reignited in that space again. Louise Casey did a big piece on it. I think it was about 2018 in The Guardian. She did a big editorial on this. But here we've got it, you know, it's reared its head again on the back of AI. So it's not that we need to become computer scientists or technologists or any of those sorts of things, but we certainly need to make them our friends. You're so lucky, Helen Cara.
I know.
You've had this for such a long time. Where is he? We'll all be gravitating towards Nick. I've put a whole lot of references on here because, again, I think it'll be handy for when you go back out, if you do go back after this, and think about how can I follow some of this stuff up. And these are just some of the people that I have been reading and thinking alongside some of these people recently, because there's groups of desisters and resistors emerging all of the time. And I think we think that these are kind of fictive kind of stories that will never come to fruition, but we are living very much in that world that these people have in their head. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, I can't remember who it was, about this idea of their realities and how dominant a few people's realities are to the masses, and the impact that that is having, and how is that actually being allowed to like unfold the way it has. And with no pause button, there's no pause button. I got criticised in a paper not so long ago about suggesting we should pause to think about this. And I was thinking we absolutely do, because everything else is racing ahead at a rate of knots. Somebody needs to pull the handbrake on here and have a think about this. I've already sort of mentioned this in terms of what people know or do not know about their own data profile. I described it as my digital twin. And whilst they're being, as I said, embedded into all these various education, health, social services systems, people's awareness of that is very low, which is very shocking actually. And then again, that traces me back to the educators educating the professionals who are going out and doing these jobs and thinking that this is okay. We're becoming institutionalized and part of the problem. If you haven't come across, have you come across Mike Berners-Lee's work? Tim Berners-Lee's brother. So Tim made the internet. He's very upset about it a lot of the time. He's a great speaker and a great writer. He uses this idea of a polycrisis in terms of how disabled we all are, thinking that we can do anything about this. We're mobilized because there are so many massive things going on in the world. And what one do we take on? And where do we start with all of this? And how quickly we have got to this place? And can we go back quickly? Or can we retreat and resist in some way? And he talks about this climate of truth, and I think that's really helpful. That's a really helpful language again that we're putting into, you know, our research proposals and all this sort of thing. And when we're working with students around theirs, you know, what are we doing to support a climate of truth in the middle of all this melee that we're living in? Sarah Banks, who's a social work academic, has written this really nice paper not that long ago about this idea again of slow ethics. And I think that's what creative research communities do really well. Creative researchers do really well. You know, they listen really carefully. They understand the word from, as they say, from other people's perspectives, and they consider alternatives. And I think that's, for me, where I am. What is the alternative? And how do we, as a grouping, take action to change it? There was another nice paper came to the fore actually recently. I don't know if anybody read it. Helen Cara's paper and Lucy Pickering's paper around research ethics management, which fits really well with the work that Dana and I had done a while ago. We have the tools to do this, and we've got the framework, and we've got values. It's all there. But again, what steps do we need to take to action that? You know, in our institutions and our organisations, you know, individual work and our practices. It's a really, if you haven't read that paper, it is, not just saying it because you're sitting there, but it's a really good paper. It gives some lovely examples of where people have made change and the possibilities. We obviously need regulation, and that's being pushed back on now. I don't know how many times has the American Senate brought the Broligarchs to account for their technologies, and they've all fell out. And at one point, is it in the middle of the pandemic, Zuckerberg literally pulled the plug on Facebook in Australia because they all annoyed him. You know, so but they're holding court because we're so wedded to all these different platforms and technologies. We're in there now, we're committed, we're invested. That was in the initial plan, but we didn't see that because they, you know, they exploited human tendencies for connection and for collaboration and for being together and all that. It was very skillful when you think about it. And there has been a lot of work done around regulation. But again, not enough. There is one guy actually, I don't know if you've come across Chris Holmes, and he put a brilliant paper out about regulation. And he sets out 8 realities that I thought would resonate with us and the kind of people that we want to work with and work for. And his work is actually changing the dial in government quite a bit, which is really encouraging. So he talks about here the voter, the scam, the benefit claimant, job seeker, the teenager. We're seeing so many awful circumstances of people getting into relationships with chatbots, and the awful, painful experiences that families are having being left in that circumstance. What kind of place have we got to in terms of isolation, or that's your default to go to? You know, for social support or any kind of support, or for a relationship? What is going on? The other part of this is in terms of not just our methods, but what do we need to start looking at and looking at more carefully with people? I've mentioned this before. We do need to start to mobilize around a counter narrative for this, and I think Postdigital is helpful for that as well. And there's been so much talk recently about, you know, the scale of this problem, but would any of us really think about this problem at that scale of nuclear war and all those sorts of things? Would we associate it in that level? Do we give it that kind of urgency? Because I think that's what we need to do. There's some pushback starting to happen. I've linked lots of academic papers. It's been so hard to write this talk. Well, one, I've been really sick, but the other bit of it is that every day there are 2 or 3 really useful pieces coming out. So if you're not on LinkedIn, here's me bringing you into another platform. But that's where we are at the minute, because Twitter was brilliant and we had the golden olden days. We're all hanging out, supporting each other, knowing what each other was up to, sharing each other's work. Like I met Kate coming in yesterday and I thought, I met Kate in London years ago. She's doing this brilliant work. And then Sue very kindly just bought me. Did you see that you can buy Kate's magazine out there? She'll even sign it for you and personalise it, which is really cute. But I didn't know that's how far that work had gone, because I was so reliant on Twitter to keep me up to date on all the different people's work that I really appreciate and helps me in my work. So I'm saying LinkedIn because that's where I am now, kind of thing, because it's one place where I can share work and find out what people are doing, because there's so much going on in this space. So I've linked as much as I possibly can into this. So this is another question I wanted to ask you. Actually, I want to ask the questions the other way, if that's all right. Like, are we surplus to requirement? Like, can we automate every single part of the research process? Like, we say no, but actually we could. It's like social workers a few weeks ago when I said to them, can we automate social work? They're like, absolutely not. We need to be going out in our cars to people's houses and having cups of tea and doing all those things that we do. And I was thinking, you can automate an assessment. You can prioritize what people need. You can send them towards it online. They can get the resource like that. Because that's the direction of travel if we don't do something about it. You're going to be complicit in this problem. Yeah, we're nearly there. So basically what this paper, really helpful paper, is talking about, it's about the process, not the product. But again, we need to hold tight and hold true to that. I'll not go into all this because this is about automation, complacency and compliance. You know, are you compliant to automation? It's worth having a look at that. And there's a couple of points I do want to make that are really important that I haven't even touched anywhere near on, is the impact on people and the impact on our planet. Because every time any of us do any of these kinds of searches, it has an impact on real people. It's usually about $2 a day. And what they're being exposed to is horrific. It is changing their lives in not good ways. And they're normally in the global south. So again, we don't see them. We really need to think about when we click, what are we committing to in terms of people and in terms of our planet. And the very last slide here is Beverly Morris, who bought her dream house. And you may have seen this on the news, where she now has to take the odd shower because the water is just trickling. There's not enough water for her in all our searches. Because the reality is, it's all our searches that it's needed for these data centres, and they're increasing. The UK is the second biggest place in the world, after America, then Germany, for data centres. Have you ever seen one? Have you ever driven past one? They're really hard to see. They're usually behind trees and all the rest of it, and that's how they're talking about social responsibility. We stuck a few hundred trees in. Again, I think it's worth, every time we click, that we remember that we're committing to something, and that's an impact on a person and our environment. And this is really what I really squeeze this in here. I know this is really naughty, but I'm gonna go for it. I've got like a burner phone, which I probably shouldn't say in public, but I have to test these things out without any implications for me or my family or my work, right? So I did one of those, hey Sarah, you know Helen Cara? Oh yes, Amanda, I know Helen Cara. My Siri, by the way, is an Irish accent, and it's really nice. She can do that with you. You can change their accent. So it was feeding this all back, and I said, so hey Siri, describe creative methods as per Helen Cara. So I wanted to check out. You don't have to read it in detail now, but I thought, well, that's quite plausible because it is quite good at handling some things. I thought, yeah, I don't think I put the or alternative to in because I thought you might argue with that. I asked it another thing then. I said, okay, then, like, what might you say about AI? And actually, again, I thought, you know what? You've read Helen Cara's last 3 blogs. Because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have said that. So it does have some uses, and it is quite useful for textual stuff. But I would be saying we need to be careful making choices about our technology, our AI use in this. I was just leaving the house and I took a couple of pictures of the books that were on my desk because I couldn't do all the references. I was just being very lazy. I thought I'll just share those with you because those are really, really good books. And I did put obviously our Phenomenography book. I did sort of set that in, and I didn't actually. I was running out of the house and I thought, oh, I forgot to write down all the references to the book. But what I did do was I copied a couple of really good reading lists that you can, even if you're not on LinkedIn, access. They are really, the press is so hot, it's going to go on fire, put it like that. But thinking about the bottom line, so this is the kind of reverse of the questions. I want to invite everybody to articulate, and I didn't talk about metaphor and I don't have time, about this idea of a prenup. And like prenup sort of, you work things out in a prenup. You agree, isn't it, about anticipated risks, what you're prepared to give or not give, what you want to protect or whatever. And I was thinking about that's a really useful, and I can't remember who, I think it was Sophie and James and Jess, I don't know if they're still here, yesterday was talking about metaphor. And if they are here, I've got this really lovely article to share with you. But instead of asking me loads of questions I won't have answers for, it would be really helpful for people to talk about where you're up to in terms of your negotiables and your non-negotiables in this AI saturated world. So thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Amazing, Amanda. I've completely failed as chair and I blame the topic and it was super interesting. I'm also going to make the executive decision that we're going to take an extra 10 minutes for questions.
We can't, I'm sorry, because
Really?
we rearrange the room.
But we can't, okay, so there goes my decision. Questions, how about we have 3 quickly now, online, please get some ready. And Amanda's here for the rest of the day, so please.
Hi, yeah, I'll definitely catch you because I have too many questions, but can you please comment on like how we can use our political power to engage? Yeah, I know, right? Because I'm thinking about boycott and divestment and how it can play into this. I'm thinking about voting rights, but I'm also thinking about how we engage with people when their digital behavior in their personal life comes out. Like in Italy, where I'm from now, it's like a big case of like these online platforms that where loads of straight men are like posting pictures of their wife, their children, and whatever. Like, and I'm thinking, oh, every time a woman comes out to have been put in this kind of groups, she is more prone to be fired, especially if she's in certain kind of positions, than the men in those groups doing the things that whose identity get protected, for example. And we have, I don't know, men who work with children that aren't in these groups. So it's like how we. Sorry, it's also about political power. Like when we interact with this situation, that's political.
Right. I think we have time for the one.
I'll just briefly, like, that's a massive question, isn't it? And it's about like social order, and it's about modelling and about how we want to be in the world, isn't it? It's huge. Like, how do you use your political power when there's nobody to vote for? There's no alternative that we can align ourselves with. I could be wrong, this would be projected into the space. But you know, there is something about like, what if we all decided to go off the platforms? We said, no, we're not doing this anymore. We don't do that. I can't remember who else I was talking about. It might have been Amy. I was talking about this, and Sue, about this idea of the collective. We work in the eye. You know, the hangout of kind of, or the hangover, isn't it, from individualism and populism? Like it's very much still alive and well and kicking, isn't it? We don't operate in the we. We have notions of we in groups and collectives. And I think as Sue and I had a great conversation. She should have came to breakfast yesterday with Sue and I, because we bottomed this one out there pretty much, didn't we? About this idea of how do you work in the we? You know, we claim to work in the we, but we do keep people out and people in and all that sort of thing. And where are these we's happening? You know, where are people collecting and connecting together? It's a huge, like, I'm really happy to talk about it, because there's so many aspects of it. And actually allowing people to control your data and put your data online without having a conversation with people to say, I don't permit you to put my data online.
It's
one from online.
it's
Take one from online.
one from online.
Put one from online.
Yeah.
I'll do the one that came through. I would be interested to hear what Amanda thinks of what we need to consider about promoting and modeling open research as open scholarship, given the concerns about tech being controlled by a minority with a different agenda to ours as researchers.
Oh God. This is why I was worried to talk about this, because again, there are massive problems, isn't it? Like there are huge problems for us to navigate. Maybe we should, well, we can't even say it because Helen's got this new journal and it's with a you know, it's with a publisher, you know what I mean? There's all those technicalities to work through. We're publishing books, we're publishing articles. We've been in that relationship for a very long time, but that relationship has changed. I'm sure arguments about open need to change, massively need to change. Open for who, for how, and for where. And I think the where is the most technical problem that we have. I wish I had the solution, because if I had the solution, I'd be able to hang out with whales on the boats and the bodyguards.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much. I loved all the cartoons. I love the references. If you have any questions, go and see Amanda. And I think that Prenup is such a good thing for us to take away. And I think the thing we can do is do the best job possible as researchers know, and take responsibility for our own data and what we do with participants. So we go with that. Tea and coffee outside. The room's going to be set up. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. That was yeah, brilliant. I was worried it wasn't real. It was so much. That's crazy. I know, it was fine. It was fab. We didn't have enough time for questions, but that's okay. Tina said to me, can we have longer? But we can't.